The forest was supposed to be empty. The cabin was supposed to be forgotten, and the man walking toward it was supposed to disappear quietly after the war took everything from him. With nothing left but a broken past and an aging K-9 who refused to leave his side, a veteran stepped into the cold woods of Washington, never knowing this abandoned place would choose him back. What happens next will make you believe in quiet miracles and second chances for the forgotten. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. If you believe no child or animal should ever face fear alone, hit subscribe now and share this story with someone who needs hope. Spokane, Washington, wore winter the way an old soldier wore a uniform, without complaint, but with a weight you could feel in your bones. The city sat under a low sky the color of wet steel, the kind that never quite decided whether it would snow or simply keep raining until everything softened and gave up. Downtown lights smeared across puddles along Division Street, and the wind slid between brick buildings like it knew every weak seam. Out on the edges, where the pavement cracked and the pines began, the air carried the sharp bite of cold sap and exhaust. It was late afternoon, the hour when the day pretended it might still be kind, and then proved it was lying. Ethan Cole moved through it with the practiced economy of someone who had learned to make himself small in wide, dangerous places. He was 38, tall in a way that came from bone and posture more than muscle, though the muscle was there too. Ropey strength in his forearms, shoulders tightened by years of hauling gear and holding tension. His face had the angular, worn symmetry of a man who rarely slept deeply, a straight nose that had taken at least one hard hit, a jawline darkened by rough stubble, and a faint scar that cut a pale line near his right eyebrow. His hair was kept short, almost out of habit, dark brown with a few early threads of gray that looked like they had arrived after a single bad month and decided to stay. When people glanced at him, they read him quickly. Veteran, maybe. Tired, definitely. Not looking for trouble, but not afraid of it either. Beside him trotted Rex, a Belgian Malinois with a coat the color of dusted copper and a muzzle gone noticeably lighter with age. Rex was old for a working dog, 10, maybe 11. His movements still sharp, but carried with an extra measure of caution, as if he was conserving something precious. One ear bore a small notch, the memory of an accident Ethan never spoke about. A thin white line ran along the dog's flank where fur didn't grow the same anymore. Rex's eyes were the steady amber of a dog that had been taught to look for answers in a human's face. He kept to Ethan's left, close enough that their shoulders nearly aligned, a habit from a life that had once been organized by commands and clear roles. Now, there were no commands, only the quiet agreement that they would keep moving. Ethan carried everything he owned in a battered canvas duffel slung across his back and a smaller backpack in his left hand. The duffel was stained with old mud and oil, its zipper repaired twice with a wire twist that had started as a field fix and became permanent. In the backpack were practical things: a spare thermal shirt, socks, a compact first aid kit, a folded poncho, a metal water bottle. Nothing sentimental. The sentimental things had a way of breaking you open when you couldn't afford to be open. They had been outside for 3 nights. The first night, Ethan told himself it was temporary. He had said the word out loud, temporary, as if the cold would take it seriously and back off. The second night, he stopped saying it. By the third, the city felt less like a place he lived and more like a terrain he was navigating. A person could get lost in a city just as easily as in a desert, especially if you moved through it like a ghost. It wasn't that he hadn't tried. In the weeks after his discharge, he had done what people recommended, what pamphlets suggested, what his own pride insisted was enough. He had filled out forms in a fluorescent office that smelled like stale coffee and carpet cleaner, hands steady while his stomach tightened. He had listened to a woman behind a counter talk to him in a voice carefully trained to sound warm without promising anything. Her name tag had read Sarah, and she matched it. Sarah Donovan, late 30s, average height, slim in a tired way, with auburn hair pulled into a loose bun that slipped as the day went on. Her skin was pale, freckled across the bridge of her nose, and she wore glasses that she pushed up repeatedly with one finger when she was thinking. She wasn't unkind. She was simply worn down by how many people came in, needing more than she could give. When she looked at Ethan, her eyes softened in that particular way people do when they recognize a story they have seen too many times. "I can put you on the list," she had said, tapping her keyboard, "but the list is long. Winter makes it longer." Ethan had nodded as if he was hearing weather, not his future. Sarah had slipped him a paper with shelter addresses and meal hours, and then, after a small hesitation, added in a quieter voice, "If you can keep the dog with you, some places will turn you away. I'm sorry. I hate saying that." Ethan had looked down at Rex, whose body was pressed against his shin like a living anchor, and he had understood that no shelter was going to be the answer if it required abandoning the one living thing that still trusted him without conditions. "Thanks," he had said. His voice had been flat, not rude, just empty of extras. Sarah had watched him go with the expression of someone who wanted to follow and couldn't. The job search was worse, not because of rejection. Ethan had survived things that made rejection feel almost polite, but because of the shape of the conversations. Employers liked him fine until they noticed what lived behind his quiet. He didn't talk much in interviews. He didn't laugh at jokes. He didn't soften himself to make other people comfortable. He answered questions with precision, and some people heard that as coldness, others as threat. One guy at a tire shop had leaned back in his chair and said, half joking, "You're not going to snap on my customers, right?" Ethan had stared at him long enough for the joke to shrivel. He hadn't snapped. He had simply walked out. The last paycheck he'd had, small as it was, went to keep Rex fed and vaccinated. After that, it went to gas, then to a motel room for one night when freezing rain turned the world into a sheet of glass. Then, it disappeared, like money always did, leaving behind the same cold math: you cannot buy stability with coins that were never meant to last. On that late afternoon in Spokane, Ethan stopped outside a convenience store whose sign flickered like it was deciding whether it wanted to exist. The air smelled of diesel and cheap fryer grease from somewhere nearby. He stood just far enough from the door to avoid being accused of loitering, but close enough that he could feel the warmth burst out each time someone entered. Rex sat without being told, tail wrapped around his paws, eyes tracking every movement with professional calm. Ethan checked his pocket. 47 cents. He looked at the coins as if they might change their minds. He didn't feel panic. Panic burned too much energy. He felt a slow, familiar tightening in his chest, the same sensation he used to get before a mission when there was nothing left to plan and all you could do was move. A man stepped out of the store and nearly bumped into Ethan. He was in his 50s, short and broad with a thick neck, wearing a heavy work jacket stained with grease. His beard was patchy and gray, and his hands were red and cracked from the cold. He glanced at Rex and then at Ethan's duffel. "Dog's a good one," he said, not unkindly. His voice carried the blunt friendliness of someone who spoke mostly to machines and didn't overthink people. Ethan nodded once. "Yeah," he said. The man hesitated as if considering something, then pulled a foil-wrapped breakfast burrito from his bag, still warm. He held it out. "Got an extra," he said. He didn't make it a speech. He didn't ask for a story. He offered it the way you offer a wrench when someone is stuck, because it's the obvious thing to do. Ethan's first instinct was refusal. Pride rose quick and automatic, an old reflex that had outlived its usefulness. But then Rex lifted his head slightly, nostrils flaring. Ethan took the burrito and said, "Thank you." The words came out rough, like they hadn't been used in a while. The man nodded, satisfied, and walked to a battered pickup, engine already running. Ethan broke the burrito in half, wrapped the other half carefully, and tucked it away for later. He gave Rex a bite first. Rex accepted it gently, teeth controlled, eyes still scanning. Ethan ate slowly, feeling the warmth spread through his body like a small, temporary miracle. Night was coming fast, the way it did in winter. The sky darkened to bruised purple, and the temperature dropped another step without warning. Ethan pulled his jacket tighter and started walking again, Rex rising smoothly and falling into place. They headed north, away from the center, toward the parts of Spokane where the city thinned and the land began to take over. Industrial lots, dead-end roads, the scent of wet pine creeping in like a promise or a warning. Ethan had no plan in the way people meant it. He had direction, which was different. He followed the quieter streets, the ones with fewer eyes. He avoided open spaces. He listened. At an underpass near the rail lines, he paused. The concrete offered some protection from wind. Someone had been there recently. There was a flattened cardboard box, an empty can, a small pile of cigarette butts. Ethan didn't move closer. He assessed the way he always did. Exits, sightlines, shadows. Rex stood still, head lowered slightly, ears angled, taking in everything. Rex's body didn't tense, but his focus sharpened. Not danger. Presence. Ethan understood that too. He kept moving. The first drops of sleet began to fall, clicking against his hood like tiny stones. Rex shook once, then continued, unbothered. Ethan felt the cold seep through his boots and into his ankles. He thought about the shelter list Sarah had given him, folded in his pocket like a half-hearted map. He thought about rules. No dogs, no exceptions, and felt his jaw tighten. He would not leave Rex tied to a fence in this weather. He would not trade loyalty for a cot. As they passed a row of dark storefronts, Ethan caught his reflection in a window. A tall man hunched slightly against the cold, a dog at his side, both of them moving with the same weary discipline. He looked like someone returning from a long war and discovering there was no parade, no homecoming, just pavement and weather and the stubborn insistence of life to continue. He looked, briefly, like a man on the verge of disappearing. Rex glanced up at him as if sensing the shift. Ethan reached down and rubbed the dog's neck, fingers pressing into the thick fur. "We're good," he murmured, not because he believed it fully, but because Rex deserved to hear it. Rex leaned subtly into the touch, and the simple weight of that trust steadied Ethan's breathing. Ahead, beyond the last of the streetlights, the outline of pines rose like a darker sky. The wind carried the smell of wet wood and distant smoke. Ethan didn't know where they would sleep tonight. He didn't know what tomorrow would demand, but he knew one thing with a clarity that cut through the cold. They would keep moving until they found a place that couldn't be taken from them easily. And somewhere beyond the city's tired edges, something waited, quiet, forgotten, and stubbornly standing, though Ethan did not yet know its shape. The trees closed in gradually, the way Spokane's outskirts always did, as if the city were embarrassed to admit how quickly it gave up control. Streetlights thinned, then vanished altogether, replaced by the dull sheen of sleet catching what little light remained in the sky. Ethan Cole followed an old service road that curved away from the last cluster of warehouses, its gravel softened by years of rain and neglect. The cold sharpened as the forest thickened, not the dramatic cold of blizzards and whiteouts, but the quiet kind that crept under clothing and settled there, patient and relentless. Rex's pace slowed just enough to match the change in terrain, his paws placed carefully now, nails clicking softly against stone, ears rotating in small, precise movements. He was no longer merely walking, he was working, even if no one had asked him to. His body angled slightly forward, head low, tail steady. Age had dulled his speed, but not his instincts. Ethan watched him out of the corner of his eye, trusting that if anything truly dangerous waited ahead, Rex would feel it before he did. The road ended without ceremony. One moment it existed, cracked and narrow, and the next it dissolved into leaf litter and mud. Ethan stopped, breath fogging, listening. The forest answered with the small, indifferent sounds of night, branches ticking in the wind, something scurrying through underbrush, the distant rush of water he couldn't yet see. He should have turned back. Every sensible part of him knew that moving deeper into the woods without shelter, without daylight, without a plan, was a bad idea. Instead, he stepped forward. The cabin revealed itself the way forgotten things often did, not suddenly, but reluctantly. At first, it was only a darker shape among the trees, a geometry that didn't belong to nature's loose rules. Then, the lines sharpened, a slanted roof, a wall sagging inward, the dull glint of a window clouded with grime. The structure sat in a shallow clearing, half swallowed by moss and low ferns, as if the forest had been working patiently to reclaim it and simply hadn't finished yet. Ethan stopped at the edge of the clearing. Rex moved ahead 2 steps, then halted. He sniffed the air, circled once, slow and deliberate, then sat. Not stiff, not alarmed, just settled. Ethan felt something in his chest ease, just a fraction. Up close, the cabin looked worse. The roof was patched with mismatched sheets of rusted metal. One corner caved enough to collect water. The wooden siding had gone gray and soft in places, warped by decades of weather. A faded emblem, once green, now barely recognizable, was bolted beside the door. A stylized pine tree with the words State Forestry Service ghosting beneath it. Someone had tried to pry the emblem off at some point and failed, leaving gouges in the wood like claw marks. The door itself was crooked but intact. A padlock hung from the latch, orange with rust, its shackle bent. Ethan tested it with a cautious pull. It gave easily, snapping open with a dry, surprised sound. He frowned. The lock hadn't been cut. It had simply given up. "All right," he muttered, more to himself than to Rex. Inside, the air smelled of damp wood, old dust, and something faintly metallic. The space was small, one main room with a sagging table bolted to the floor, a narrow bunk against the far wall, and a wood stove crouched in the corner like a tired animal. Cobwebs draped the ceiling beams. Leaves had blown in through gaps near the windows and collected in drifts along the walls. But there was no fresh trash, no signs of recent habitation. Whatever life this place had once held had left quietly. Ethan stepped inside, boots thudding softly on warped planks. Rex followed, sniffing every inch with professional seriousness, then claimed a spot near the door, lowering himself with a grunt that sounded suspiciously human. His amber eyes never stopped moving. Ethan shrugged off his duffel and set it down carefully, as if the cabin might object to sudden movements. He ran a hand along the table. Fingers coming away gritty but dry. That mattered. Dry meant shelter. Dry meant survival. He checked the stove next. The door creaked open, revealing ash and the remnants of long-dead fires. The flue looked clear enough. He'd need wood, but the forest was generous if you knew what you were looking for. Ethan straightened, joints popping, and for the first time since leaving the city, he allowed himself to imagine staying put for more than a few hours. Rex shifted, ears pricking. Ethan followed the dog's gaze to the window. Outside, between the trees, a figure moved. Ethan's body responded before his thoughts caught up. He went still, weight shifting subtly, muscles coiling with the memory of drills and ambushes. He reached down, resting a hand on Rex's collar, not restraining, just grounding. The figure stepped closer into the clearing, resolving into a man leading a horse. The man was tall and spare, his height emphasized by a narrow frame and the way he carried himself, upright but not rigid. He wore a heavy oilskin coat that had seen real work, its shoulders darkened by rain and age. His beard was long but neatly trimmed, more salt than pepper, framing a face marked by deep lines around the eyes and mouth. Those eyes were sharp and pale, the color of winter sky, set in a face that had learned patience the hard way. He stopped several yards from the cabin, one hand resting lightly on the horse's reins. The horse was a broad-chested bay, older, with a white blaze down its nose and a calm demeanor that suggested it had been trusted with difficult terrain and worse weather. Its coat was damp and dark, breath steaming softly in the cold air. It flicked an ear toward Ethan and Rex, then back again, unconcerned. The man studied them for a long moment, not hostile, assessing. "You planning to spend the night?" he asked finally. His voice was low, roughened by age and cold, but not unkind. Ethan considered lying. He decided against it. "Looks that way." The man nodded once. "Name's Thomas Hale," he said. "Most folks call me Tom." He didn't offer a hand, which Ethan appreciated. "I check this area every few days, make sure no one's burning the place down or cutting what shouldn't be cut." His gaze flicked briefly to the open door, then back to Ethan. "Didn't think anyone would be here this late." "I didn't think I would be either," Ethan replied. Tom's mouth twitched, almost a smile. He glanced at Rex. "K9? "Yes." Tom's expression shifted, something like recognition passing through it. "Figured. I was Army long time ago. Different war." He shrugged as if the detail barely mattered. "Dog's old." "So am I," Ethan said. This time, Tom did smile, small and genuine. "Fair enough." He stepped closer, boots quiet on the wet ground, and peered past Ethan into the cabin. "Place won't keep you warm by itself," he said, "but it'll keep the wind off. That counts for something." He reached into a saddlebag and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in oilcloth. "I've got some dry kindling. You'll need it." Ethan hesitated only a second before accepting it. "Thank you." Tom shrugged, already turning back toward his horse. "Storm's coming in from the west, colder than tonight. If you're still here in the morning, I'll stop by again." He paused, looking back over his shoulder. "Name?" "Ethan." Tom nodded. "Good luck, Ethan." He led the horse away, the pair dissolving back into the trees as quietly as they'd appeared. Ethan stood in the doorway for a long moment after they were gone, listening to the forest reclaim the clearing. Then he closed the door, set the kindling by the stove, and exhaled slowly. Rex rose, stretched, and circled once before settling closer to the warmth to be, his body language loose now, satisfied. Outside, the sleet thickened, tapping insistently against the roof. Inside, for the first time in days, Ethan felt something close to relief. Not hope, not yet, but the sense that this place, broken, forgotten, and stubbornly standing, might hold long enough for him to catch his breath. For tonight, that was enough. Morning arrived without ceremony. The cold loosened its grip just enough to be tolerable, retreating from the sharp cruelty of night into a damp, bone-deep chill that settled in layers. Pale light filtered through the trees, turning the sleet-slicked branches into strands of dull silver. The cabin creaked as the temperature shifted, wood expanding and contracting like an old body waking from an uneasy sleep. Ethan Cole opened his eyes slowly, the way he always did when he wasn't sure where he was. For half a second, instinct told him to reach for gear that wasn't there anymore. Then he remembered the cabin, the stove, the quiet weight of shelter around him. He lay still on the narrow bunk, staring up at ceiling beams darkened by age and smoke, listening. Rex was awake already. The dog lay near the door, chin resting on his paws, amber eyes alert but calm. His breathing was steady, deep. The posture said what words didn't need to. Nothing had disturbed the night. No footsteps, no voices, no threat. Ethan exhaled and sat up. His joints protested softly, a reminder that years of strain didn't vanish just because the war was over. He swung his legs down, boots cold and stiff, and rubbed his face with both hands, feeling the rough stubble scrape against his palms. The cabin smelled different in daylight, less damp, more like old pine and ash. He moved quietly, more out of habit than necessity. He checked the stove first. The kindling Thomas Hale had given him sat exactly where he'd left it. Ethan added a few pieces, struck a spark with practiced efficiency, and coaxed a flame into being. The fire caught slowly, reluctantly, then grew more confident, its heat pushing back against the cold corners of the room. Rex rose, stretched, and repositioned himself closer to the stove, sighing as warmth reached his bones. Age showed more in moments like this, in the careful way he lowered himself, in the stiffness that lingered before comfort arrived. Ethan watched him with a familiar mix of gratitude and dread. Dogs didn't get old quietly. They reminded you every day that time was moving whether you were ready or not. Outside, the forest had changed. The sleet had turned to a fine mist clinging to everything. The ground was dark and soft, layered with needles and leaves that muted sound. Ethan stepped out, breath fogging, and scanned the clearing. No tracks except their own, and the faint imprint of Tom's horse from the night before. The cabin looked smaller in daylight, more fragile, but also more real. Less like an accident, more like a choice. He circled the structure, noting details he'd missed in the dark. One wall bowed outward slightly, the wood there softer, weathered nearly to pulp. The roof patch Tom had glanced at was worse than Ethan initially thought. One hard storm could push it past the point of holding. But the foundation, rough stone and poured concrete, was solid. Someone had built this place to last. Behind the cabin, half hidden by ferns, Ethan found a narrow trail leading down toward the sound of water he'd heard the night before. A creek cut through the forest there, shallow but fast-moving, its surface broken by stones smoothed by decades of flow. The water was clear, cold, drinkable with care. Rex followed him down, sniffing along the bank, tail moving in slow, thoughtful arcs. He drank first, lapping cautiously, then looked up as if waiting for approval. Ethan knelt, filled his bottle, and drank deeply. The cold burned, sharp and clean, and left him feeling more awake than he had in weeks. Back in the cabin, with the fire established and a small routine forming, Ethan did something he hadn't planned to do. He explored. The bunk was bolted to the wall, sturdy but narrow, with a thin mattress that smelled faintly of mildew. Under it, he found a dented metal box filled with tools too rusted to be immediately useful. The table drawers held nothing but dust and a single bent nail. The shelves were bare. It was behind the stove, while checking the flue, that he noticed the irregularity in the wall. One plank sat slightly proud of the others, its edges darker, as if it had been removed and replaced more than once. Ethan frowned and pried it loose carefully. Behind it was a shallow cavity. Inside lay a leather-bound notebook, its cover cracked and soft, and a small, cloth-wrapped bundle. Ethan's fingers hesitated before touching either. He'd learned long ago that hidden things often carried weight. But curiosity won out. He lifted the notebook first, brushing dust from the cover. The name Samuel Reed was pressed into the leather in faded gold lettering. Ethan sat heavily on the bunk and opened it. The handwriting inside was neat but unpretentious, the lines slanted slightly right, the mark of someone who wrote often but never for show. The entries were dated, spanning years. Samuel Reed, Forest Service Ranger, notes about trail maintenance, weather patterns, lost hikers, small observations about birds, about the way snow changed the sound of the woods, and then, scattered among the practical entries, moments of something deeper. December 12th. Cabin held through the storm. Brought the miller's boy in here when they couldn't reach town. Fire kept him alive. April 3rd. Sometimes I think this place matters more than people realize. It remembers us when no one else does. Ethan closed the notebook slowly. He unwrapped the cloth bundle next. Inside was a tarnished compass, its glass scratched but intact, and a photograph. The photo showed 3 people standing in front of the cabin, younger, cleaner, smiling in the careless way people do when they believe time is on their side. A man in a ranger's uniform, Samuel presumably, stood with an arm around a woman with dark hair pulled back in a loose braid. Between them was a boy of maybe 10, grinning widely, one front tooth missing. On the back, written in the same careful hand, "Home Base." Ethan swallowed. Rex padded over and sat beside him, leaning his shoulder lightly against Ethan's knee. The contact was unassuming, easy, but it anchored him. Ethan rested a hand on the dog's neck, thumb brushing the familiar notch in Rex's ear. This mattered, he said quietly. He wasn't sure to whom. The day passed in pieces. Ethan gathered deadfall from the forest, careful to choose wood that would burn clean. He reinforced the door latch with a scrap of wire from his pack. He swept out leaves and debris, making the cabin feel less like a ruin and more like a place someone might choose to be. Rex supervised, occasionally barking at birds with half-hearted authority, then settling back down. In the afternoon, a sound drifted up the trail. Footsteps, measured and unhurried. Ethan stiffened automatically, then recognized the rhythm. Thomas Hale appeared at the edge of the clearing, this time without his horse. In daylight, he looked older than Ethan had first thought. His beard was neatly combed, his coat patched at the elbows, his movements deliberate. He carried a small pack slung over one shoulder. "Figured I'd find you still here," Tom said, stopping a respectful distance away. His eyes flicked to the thin thread of smoke rising from the chimney. "Good sign," Ethan nodded. "Cabin's holding." Tom stepped closer, peering at the structure with a practiced eye. "Better than most," he said. "State abandoned it, but the forest didn't." His gaze landed briefly on the notebook in Ethan's hand. Recognition crossed his face. "You found Sam's journal." "You knew him." Tom's expression softened, lines around his eyes deepening. "We crossed paths. Good man. Lost his family young. Threw himself into the work after that." He looked at Ethan, really looked this time. He believed places could keep people going when nothing else would. Ethan didn't answer. He didn't need to. Tom reached into his pack and pulled out a small canvas sack. "More kindling and some dried beans. Won't last forever, but it'll help." He hesitated, then added, "If you're thinking of staying longer, there are things you should know about the land, about who might come asking questions." Ethan met his gaze. "I'm thinking of staying." Tom nodded once as if that settled something. Then we'll talk. As the afternoon faded toward evening, Ethan felt the weight of the cabin settle around him, not heavy, not trapping, but present. The walls held stories. The fire held heat. Rex slept near the door, trusting the place enough to rest fully. Ethan sat at the table with Samuel Reed's notebook open, adding nothing yet, just reading. He wasn't ready to write, but for the first time since leaving the service, he felt the edge of something like belonging, not borrowed, not temporary, earned perhaps through simply staying. The cabin didn't promise safety, it didn't promise permanence, but it didn't ask questions either, and for now, that was enough. The storm. Tom Hale had warned about arrived just before dawn, not with drama, but with insistence. Wind pressed itself against the cabin as if testing its resolve, rattling the patched metal on the roof and forcing cold air through seams that had been quiet the night before. Rain followed, heavy and relentless, drumming against wood and earth until the forest seemed to breathe in one long, wet exhale. Ethan Cole woke before the worst of it, eyes opening to the sound of Rex shifting restlessly near the door. Rex was on his feet, head low, ears angled toward the walls, not alarmed but alert. The old K9 had learned the difference between danger and disturbance, and this was the latter. Weather, not threat. Ethan sat up slowly, joints stiff, and listened. The cabin held. It complained, groaned, creaked, protested, but it did not yield. Water found its way in near the bowed wall, a slow, patient drip that darkened the floorboards, but nothing more. "That's manageable," Ethan muttered, already cataloging what would need fixing. By mid-morning, the storm settled into a steady rhythm, rain easing into a cold mist. The forest beyond the windows blurred into shades of gray and green, branches bowing under the weight of water. Ethan brewed a weak cup of coffee from grounds he'd been carrying since the city, the taste bitter and thin but grounding. Rex lay with his back to the stove, eyes half closed, trusting the warmth. Ethan spent the early hours working, not the frantic work of survival, but the methodical kind that built momentum. He dragged a fallen log closer to the cabin and split it carefully, mindful of his shoulder. He propped a scrap of metal beneath the roof's weakest point to redirect runoff. He wedged a piece of cedar into the gap along the bowed wall, reducing the drip to an occasional sigh. Each small fix made the space feel less temporary, more claimed. Staying, Ethan realized, was heavier than leaving. Leaving required only motion. Staying demanded attention. Late morning brought footsteps again, faster this time, less measured than Tom's. Ethan straightened, hand instinctively brushing the pocket where a knife rested. Rex rose beside him, posture forward, muscles tightening. A woman emerged from the trees, rain-darkened jacket pulled tight around her, a canvas satchel slung across her chest. She was in her early 40s, average height, with a wiry build that spoke of long days outdoors. Her hair was a deep brown threaded with gray, cut short and practical, plastered slightly to her forehead by damp. Her face was sharp-featured, high cheekbones, a narrow nose, and her eyes were a striking hazel, bright and assessing beneath furrowed brows. She stopped when she saw Ethan and Rex, hands lifting slowly, palms open. "Easy," she said. Her voice was firm, unafraid, the voice of someone used to being heard. "I'm not here to cause trouble." Ethan didn't lower his guard, but he nodded once. "What can I do for you?" She glanced at Rex, then back at Ethan, a flicker of recognition crossing her face. "You the vet Tom mentioned?" she asked. "That depends," Ethan said. "On who's asking." She huffed a short, humorless laugh. "Fair. Name's Claire Whitman." She adjusted the strap of her satchel. "I work for the county, environmental assessment. I check sites that might turn into problems if left alone." Her gaze moved over the cabin, lingering on the roof patches, the smoke from the chimney. "This place is one of them." Ethan felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the reflexive bracing. "It's holding," he said evenly. Claire nodded, as if he'd answered a question she hadn't asked aloud. "I can see that. But holding and aloud aren't always the same thing." She studied Ethan more closely now, the posture, the scars, the quiet readiness. "Tom says you're planning to stay." "I am." Claire exhaled through her nose, considering. "Then we should talk." She glanced back toward the trees. Mind if I come in out of the rain? Ethan hesitated, then stepped aside. Rex watched her closely as she entered, but did not growl. Claire noticed, nodding once in approval. Good dog, she said softly. Rex ignored her, which only seemed to amuse her. Inside, the cabin felt smaller with another person in it. Claire took in the space quickly, eyes missing little. You've already started repairs, she observed. That roof patch wasn't there last winter. Storms change things, Ethan said. So do people, Claire replied. She set her satchel on the table and shrugged out of her jacket, revealing a faded green sweater beneath. Her movements were efficient, practiced. I'm not here to evict you, she said, as if anticipating his thoughts. Not today. But this cabin sits in a gray area. Decommission doesn't always mean forgotten, especially when someone decides to make a home out of it. Ethan leaned against the wall, arms crossed loosely. I'm not looking for trouble. Claire met his gaze, unflinching. Most people who find trouble aren't. She paused, then added, but I don't think that's what this is. Her eyes flicked to the notebook on the table, Samuel Reed's journal. Recognition softened her expression. You found Sam's things. You knew him too? Not personally, Claire said, but his reports crossed my desk when I was younger. He was thorough, stubborn, believed in the long view. She smiled faintly. People like that don't disappear quietly. The rain eased outside, the forest settling again. Claire opened her satchel and pulled out a folded map, spreading it across the table. Here's the reality, she said. This land belongs to the state, but it hasn't been actively managed in years. That makes it vulnerable to developers, to misuse, to liability claims. If someone complains or if an inspection finds this place unsafe, they can force the issue. And if it's safe? Ethan asked. Then it gets complicated, Claire said. Safety buys time. Time buys options. She tapped the map. There's precedent for caretaker arrangements, unofficial at first. Someone keeps an eye on the place, reports problems, prevents damage. It's not ownership, but it's not nothing. Ethan considered this, the weight of Samuel Reed's journal heavy in his pocket. What would that require? Claire's lips curved slightly. Work, documentation, and a willingness to be visible instead of hiding. She glanced at Rex again. Your dog helps. Search and rescue credentials carry weight, even if they're old. Rex lifted his head at the sound of her voice, ears twitching. Claire smiled despite herself. He's earned his rest, she said. But his presence tells a story people understand. The conversation was interrupted by a low rumble outside. An engine. Ethan moved to the window, scanning the clearing. A pickup truck had pulled up at the edge of the trees, its paint a dull blue, body scarred with rust. A man climbed out, broad-shouldered and thick through the chest, his movements heavy but purposeful. He wore a wool cap pulled low and a flannel jacket stretched tight across his back. His beard was full and dark, flecked with gray, framing a square jaw that looked like it had broken more than once. He glanced toward the cabin, expression unreadable. Claire followed Ethan's gaze. That's Ben Kessler, she said quietly. Owns land down the ridge, doesn't like surprises. Ethan felt his shoulders tighten. Is he a problem? Depends, Claire said. He lost a brother to a logging accident years back. Since then he's protective, of land, of rules. She met Ethan's eyes. And of what he thinks is his. Ben started toward the cabin, boots sinking slightly into the wet ground. Rex moved to Ethan's side, posture alert but controlled. Claire gathered her things. I'll leave you to it, she said. But think about what I said. Staying means being seen, and being seen means choosing how you want to be known. She paused at the door, pulling her jacket back on. I'll be back, she added, sooner than later. Ethan nodded. I'll be here. Claire slipped out into the mist, disappearing into the trees just as Ben reached the clearing. He stopped a few yards from the cabin, eyes flicking between Ethan and Rex. His gaze was sharp, suspicious, but not immediately hostile. Didn't expect company up here, Ben said. His voice was deep, roughened by years of shouting over engines and wind. This place been empty a long time. Not anymore, Ethan replied. Ben studied him, then the cabin, then Rex. Something like respect flickered in his eyes, quickly masked. We'll see, he said. He turned back toward his truck, leaving the words hanging heavy in the damp air. As the sound of the engine faded, Ethan stood in the doorway, the forest stretching silent around him. Claire's words echoed in his mind. Staying meant wait. Staying meant choosing. Rex leaned against his leg, solid and warm. Ethan closed the door, bolted it carefully, and returned to the fire. Outside, the cabin stood, tested by storm and scrutiny, still standing. And inside, Ethan felt the quiet certainty that he was no longer just passing through. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that felt both unfamiliar and strangely inevitable. The rain moved on, leaving the forest washed clean and sharp-edged, the air smelling of wet bark and cold earth. Mornings came pale and quiet, mist clinging low to the ground before lifting in slow, reluctant sheets. Ethan Cole learned the sounds of the place, the way the creek's voice changed after a cold night, the difference between wind moving through fir needles and something heavier, pushing brush aside. Staying had sharpened his senses in ways movement never had. He worked because there was work to be done, not because anyone was watching, though he knew now that eyes existed beyond the trees. He reinforced the bowed wall properly, scavenging dead cedar and fitting it with careful precision. He cleared a narrow drainage channel to guide rainwater away from the foundation. He repaired the stovepipe seal with a mixture of clay and ash, an old trick he'd learned from a man who had survived winters without ever calling it survival. Each task left his hands sore and split, knuckles reddened, but the pain was clean. Honest. Rex adjusted to the new routine easily. He woke with the light, ate sparingly, and spent long hours patrolling the perimeter of the clearing, moving slower than he once had, but no less thorough. His coat had dulled with age, the copper deepening toward brown along his back and white threaded through the fur around his muzzle. His gait carried a slight hitch in the left hind leg, the result of an injury that had ended his service years before. Still, when he stopped and stared into the trees, his posture carried authority. He was not a dog passing time. He was a presence. On the third morning after the storm, Ethan noticed tracks near the creek that didn't belong to deer or fox, boot prints, fresh. He followed them briefly, noting their direction, then stopped. The lesson was old and firm: know when to observe and when to engage. He chose observation. The engagement came to him instead. It was near midday when the sound of an engine cut through the quiet, lower and steadier than Ben Kessler's pickup. Ethan stepped out onto the cabin's narrow porch as a utility truck eased into the clearing. The vehicle bore the faded emblem of the county on its door, paint chipped, tires caked with mud. The driver climbed out slowly, stretching stiffly before closing the door. He was a man in his late 50s, average height but thick through the torso, with a broad face weathered by sun and wind. His hair was gray and thinning, cropped short, and his beard was trimmed close in a way that suggested habit rather than vanity. His eyes were tired but alert, the kind that had seen too many small problems turn into larger ones. He wore a heavy jacket and carried a clipboard tucked under one arm. Rex stood at Ethan's side, head lifted, watching. The man took them both in, then nodded once. "Ethan Cole?" he asked. "Yes." "Name's Harold Bennett," the man said, offering a hand. "Building and safety, county." His grip was firm, testing without being aggressive. "Claire asked me to take a look." Ethan gestured toward the cabin. "It's standing." Harold huffed a short breath that might have been a laugh. "Standing isn't the same as safe." He walked the perimeter slowly, eyes scanning roofline, walls, foundation. He tapped boards with his knuckles, crouched to inspect the drainage Ethan had dug, peered up into the stovepipe. His movements were deliberate, practiced. He had done this a long time. "You've been busy," Harold said finally. "Had to be," Ethan replied. Harold straightened, scribbling notes. "I've seen worse held together with optimism and duct tape," he said. "This isn't that." He looked at Ethan over the top of his clipboard. "You got construction experience?" "Field repairs," Ethan said. "Different context." Harold nodded, understanding more than the words conveyed. "Context matters." He glanced at Rex. "Dog yours?" "Partner," Ethan said. A corner of Harold's mouth lifted. "Figures." He paused, then added, "This place won't pass as a residence by code standards. Not yet, but it's not an immediate hazard." He lowered his voice slightly. "Which means no one's forcing anything today." Ethan absorbed this without visible reaction. And tomorrow? Harold sighed. Tomorrow depends on whether this becomes someone's problem. He closed his clipboard. Claire's pushing for a caretaker arrangement. It's not official, but it buys time. He met Ethan's gaze. Time only helps if you use it. I intend to. Harold nodded, satisfied. He hesitated, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small card. If something breaks that you can't fix, call this number. Don't wait until it becomes an emergency. Thank you, Ethan said. Harold tipped an imaginary hat toward Rex. Take care of him, he said, then turned back toward his truck. The engine noise faded, leaving the clearing quiet again. Ethan stood still for a long moment, feeling the weight of scrutiny lift just enough to breathe. Rex sat, tail thumping once against the ground. Good job, Ethan murmured, scratching behind the dog's ear. Rex accepted the praise with dignity. That afternoon brought another visitor, one less official and more complicated. A woman approached on foot from the ridge trail, her pace brisk, her posture upright despite the steep descent. She was in her early 30s, tall and lean, with long black hair braided tightly down her back. Her skin was a warm brown, her features sharp and composed. She wore hiking boots and a wool coat that had seen years of use, its cuffs frayed but clean. A camera hung from a strap around her neck, resting against her chest. She stopped at the edge of the clearing, taking in the cabin, Ethan, Rex. Her gaze lingered on the repairs, the smoke from the chimney, the worn path forming around the place. I'm not here to complain, she said before Ethan could speak. Her voice was calm, measured. I'm Maya Alvarez. Ethan waited. I grew up in town, Maya continued. My father was a volunteer with search and rescue. He used to talk about this cabin. She gestured toward it. Said it saved his life once, during a winter storm when he was younger than I am now. Ethan felt something shift, subtle but real. It saved people, he said. Maya nodded. That's why I wanted to see it. She glanced at Rex, eyes softening. And you. She smiled faintly. I heard there was a veteran living up here with a K9. Stories travel faster than facts. Ethan exhaled slowly. I'm not trying to make headlines. Good, Maya said. Neither am I. She lifted her camera slightly. I document local history, the parts that don't make it into brochures. Her gaze sharpened with purpose. Places like this matter. People forget that until they're gone. Rex stepped forward and sniffed the air around her, then lost interest and sat down. Maya chuckled quietly. Guess I pass. You do, Ethan said. They talked for a while then, not about ownership or legality, but about the forest, about storms and disappearances, and the way communities once relied on each other without calling it charity. Maya asked careful questions. She listened more than she spoke. When she left, she promised nothing except to return. As evening settled, Ethan fed Rex and ate his own simple meal. Sitting on the porch as the light drained from the trees. The cabin stood behind him, altered now by effort and intention. It was no longer just a shelter, it was a statement. Staying had begun to echo outward, drawing people, memories, expectations. Ethan felt the weight of it pressing down, not crushing, but demanding balance. He watched Rex settle near the door, eyes half closed, content. The dog trusted the place, trusted the choice. Ethan leaned back against the wall and closed his eyes, the forest breathing around him. He had come here to disappear. Instead, he was being seen. And somehow, he was still standing. The first real test did not arrive as a confrontation or a letter stamped with authority. It arrived as sound. A sharp, broken echo carried through the trees just after noon, thin and irregular, cutting against the steady hush of wind through fir branches. Ethan Cole froze mid-step, a length of rope slack in his hands. Rex's head snapped up instantly, body going rigid, ears forward, eyes fixed toward the eastern slope. It wasn't an animal, it wasn't machinery, it was human, and wrong. The sound came again, weaker this time. A shout, or something close to it, swallowed by distance and terrain. Rex moved without command, trotting toward the tree line with purpose, stopping only long enough to look back at Ethan. Permission, not hesitation. All right, Ethan said, already moving. He grabbed his jacket, slung the radio Claire had left on the table over his shoulder, and followed. The forest beyond the clearing dropped sharply into uneven ground. the kind that punished careless footing. Moss-covered rocks hid slick edges. Fallen branches lay half-buried under needles. Rex navigated it smoothly despite his age, choosing paths that minimized strain on his injured leg. Ethan followed, slower but steady, breathing controlled, senses narrowing the way they always did when chaos edged close. They found the source of the sound near a narrow ravine where the creek widened and churned over stone. A man lay on the far bank, half slumped against a fallen log, one leg twisted at an angle that made Ethan's stomach tighten. The man was young, mid-20s maybe, tall and broad-shouldered, with a runner's build that had gone slack with pain. His beard was uneven, dark and unkempt, shadowing a jaw clenched hard enough to tremble. Blood streaked down from a cut near his temple, drying black against pale skin. His jacket was torn at the sleeve, fabric snagged on bark. He looked up when Ethan approached, eyes wide with fear and shock. "Hey," he rasped, Don't let me pass out." "I won't," Ethan said calmly, already kneeling. His voice carried the same tone he'd used in worse places. "What's your name?" "Luke," the man said, swallowing. "Luke Garner." "All right, Luke. I'm Ethan. This is Rex." Rex stood close, steady and solid, his presence grounding. Luke's eyes flicked to the dog, and something in his expression softened immediately. "Good," Luke whispered. "Good dog." "What happened?" Ethan asked, already assessing the injury. "The leg, left femur, possibly fractured." "The angle was bad, but not catastrophic if handled right." "I slipped," Luke said. "I was hiking alone. Stupid, I know. I heard about the cabin, thought I'd check it out, lost the trail, fell." Ethan nodded, not judging. Judgment wasted time. "You did the right thing yelling." Luke let out a breath that sounded like a laugh and a sob combined. "Didn't think anyone would hear." "I did," Ethan said. He checked Luke's pulse, steady but fast, then the head wound. Superficial, bleeding controlled. He wrapped it carefully with a strip torn from Luke's sleeve, movements precise, practiced. Rex lay down nearby, close enough that Luke could feel the dog's warmth. "I'm going to get you out of here," Ethan said, "but it's going to hurt." Luke nodded once. "Okay?" The extraction took time. Ethan fashioned a splint from fallen branches and rope, securing Luke's leg with care. He moved slowly, talking the entire time, not filler, but information, grounding details. Rex stayed close, occasionally placing his head against Luke's chest when the pain spiked, a silent reassurance. By the time they reached the cabin, Luke was pale and shaking, but conscious. Ethan settled him inside near the stove, adding wood until the heat built strong and steady. Rex positioned himself beside Luke without being asked, head resting on the floor, eyes never leaving the injured man's face. Ethan keyed the radio. "Claire," he said, keeping his voice level, "I've got an injured hiker. Possible femur fracture, need medevac." Static crackled, then Claire Whitman's voice came through, sharp and focused. "Location?" Ethan gave it. She didn't ask questions she didn't need answers to. "Help's on the way," she said. "You did good." The wait stretched long. Luke drifted in and out of consciousness, pain etched into every line of his face. Between waves, he talked about his job at a tech startup in Seattle, about needing space after his father died suddenly the year before, about how silence felt safer than cities lately. He spoke like someone who hadn't meant to unload, but couldn't stop once he started. Ethan listened. He didn't interrupt. Rex stayed close, occasionally licking Luke's hand, grounding him in the moment. The sound of rotors arrived at dusk, chopping the air above the trees. The rescue team moved quickly and efficiently, professional, but curious. One of them, a woman with cropped blonde hair and weathered eyes, glanced around the cabin, then at Ethan. "You the caretaker?" she asked. Ethan hesitated. Then, "For now." She nodded, satisfied. "Good work. You stabilized him well." Luke was loaded onto the stretcher, fingers gripping Ethan's sleeve briefly before letting go. "Thank you," he said hoarsely. "I don't think I'd be alive if you hadn't been here." Ethan swallowed. "You will be." The helicopter lifted away, the sound fading into the mountains, leaving behind a sudden heavy quiet. It didn't last. Ben Kessler arrived just after dark, his truck lights cutting across the clearing. He climbed out slowly, eyes scanning the scene. The disturbed ground, the lingering smell of fuel, the cabin lit warm and steady against the night. "I saw the helicopter," Ben said. His voice was less sharp than before, edged with something like concern. "What happened?" Ethan told him. Ben listened without interrupting, arms crossed, jaw tight. When Ethan finished, Ben exhaled hard and looked away toward the trees. "My brother," he said quietly. "He fell like that. No one hurt him." The admission sat heavy between them. After a moment, Ben nodded once. "This place," he said. "It matters." He met Ethan's eyes. "I won't make trouble for you. Not over this." It wasn't an apology, but it was something. Later that night, after the fire burned low and the forest returned to its usual breath, Ethan sat on the cabin step, exhaustion settling deep into his bones. Rex lowered himself beside him with a tired grunt, leaning his weight into Ethan's leg. The radio crackled softly. Claire's voice came through again, gentler this time. "Luke made it through surgery," she said. "He's asking about the dog." Ethan smiled faintly. "Figures." When the radio fell silent, Ethan stayed where he was, looking out into the dark. The cabin behind him felt different now, not just a refuge, but a node. A place where lines crossed, where staying had consequences. Good ones. Rex sighed, eyes closing. Ethan rested a hand on the dog's head and let the quiet settle. He hadn't come here to be needed, but need, it seemed, had found him anyway. And for the first time, it didn't feel like a burden. The morning after the rescue arrived quieter than Ethan expected. No engines, no voices, just the forest resuming its patient rhythm, as if nothing remarkable had happened at all. Mist clung to the ground, pooling in the low places, and the creek's voice carried steady and unconcerned. Ethan Cole stood on the porch with a mug of coffee warming his hands, watching Rex nose along the edge of the clearing, checking the places where the night had left its faint signatures. Word traveled anyway. It came first as a truck stopping at the trailhead below the ridge, then as footsteps approaching with purpose rather than curiosity. Ethan felt it before he saw it, an alertness settling over the place, the same way it had before Luke's cry split the air. Rex lifted his head and looked toward the trees, tail still. A woman emerged from the trail, followed by two men. The woman walked in front, confident stride, shoulders square. She was in her late 40s, tall and broad-shouldered, with close-cropped hair the color of iron filings and a face weathered by sun and long days outside. Her eyes were sharp, blue-gray, the kind that measured risk quickly and remembered it longer. She wore a bright orange vest over a faded jacket and carried a rolled map under one arm. "Morning," she called, stopping at the edge of the clearing. "You Ethan Cole?" "Yes," Ethan said. "I'm Dana Mercer," she replied. "Spokane County Search and Rescue." She gestured behind her. "This is Paul and Jonah, volunteers." Paul was a compact man in his 30s with a shaved head and an easy grin, the sort of person who used humor to cut tension. Jonah looked younger, early 20s, tall and narrow with anxious eyes and a beard he hadn't quite figured out yet. He stood slightly behind the others, hands clasped, absorbing everything. Dana's gaze moved to Rex, lingering with professional interest. "That your K9? "Retired," Ethan said. Dana smiled faintly. "There's no such thing." She stepped closer, boots sinking softly into the damp ground. "Luke's parents asked us to pass along their thanks. He's stable. Recovery's going to be long, but he's alive." Ethan nodded, the tightness in his chest easing a notch. "I'm glad." Dana glanced at the cabin, the cleared drainage, the stacked firewood. "We've had reports about this place for years," she said. "Most of them start with 'used to be.'" She looked back at Ethan. "Yesterday it wasn't used to be. It was active." Ethan waited. "We don't have enough manpower to staff every trail," Dana continued. "We rely on volunteers, caretakers, people who know the land and don't panic when something goes wrong." Her eyes sharpened. "You didn't panic." "I've had practice," Ethan said. Dana nodded once, satisfied. "I'm here to ask if you'd consider coordinating with us. Informal, for now. Keep a radio on, report conditions, assist if you're able." She shrugged. No badge, no paycheck, just purpose. Ethan glanced down at Rex, who had settled at his side, posture relaxed but attentive. The dog looked up at him, amber eyes steady. "I can do that," Ethan said. Dana's smile was brief but genuine. Good. She unrolled her map on the table inside the cabin, anchoring it with a mug. We'll mark this place as an emergency waypoint. That means more eyes on you. More responsibility. She met his gaze. And more scrutiny. I understand. Paul leaned in, peering at the repairs. You do nice work, he said. My uncle tried to fix his porch once. Whole thing collapsed. Ethan almost smiled. They spent the next hour talking routes, radio channels, weather patterns that turned manageable terrain into traps. Jonah listened intently, occasionally asking careful questions. When they left, Dana shook Ethan's hand again, firm and steady. This place, she said, tapping the cabin wall. It's going to matter. Be ready for that. After they were gone, the quiet returned in layers. Ethan fed Rex, then sat with Samuel Reed's journal open on his knees. He read another entry, one he had skimmed before, but not truly seen. June 18th. People keep asking why I stay. As if staying needs a reason beyond the fact that leaving would break something I'm not ready to lose. Ethan closed the book. In the afternoon, Ben Kessler arrived on foot. No truck this time. He moved slower than usual, shoulders slumped, hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets. Up close, the lines on his face looked deeper, grief etched into the angles of his jaw. He stopped near the porch, gaze fixed on Rex for a moment before lifting to Ethan. I heard about the rescue, Ben said. Word gets around. It does, Ethan replied. Ben nodded. Silence stretched. Then Ben cleared his throat. I've got some lumber, he said, eyes flicking toward the bowed wall. Dry. Been sitting in my shed too long. Thought you might use it better than I am. Ethan studied him. Thank you. Ben shifted his weight, uncomfortable. My brother used to say places choose people, he muttered. I didn't believe him. Guess I was wrong. He hesitated, then added, if anyone gives you trouble about being here, they'll have to talk to me too. It wasn't a peace treaty, but it was close. That evening, Maya Alvarez returned, camera in hand. She moved quietly, respectful of the space, taking photographs only after asking. She captured the cabin against the low sun, Rex lying in the doorway, the way the light caught on the repaired roof. She asked Ethan questions he didn't mind answering, about process, about what it felt like to stay after years of moving. People will see this, she said, adjusting her lens. Not as a headline, as context. Context matters, Ethan said. She smiled, recognizing the echo. Night came early, the sky bruising purple and then black. Ethan lit the stove, the fire's glow painting the walls with warmth. Rex settled with a satisfied grunt, exhaustion finally catching up to him. His breathing deepened quickly, the rhythm familiar and reassuring. Later, alone with the quiet, Ethan stepped outside. The stars were sharp, the air cold and clean. He thought about the past weeks, how he'd come here to disappear and somehow become visible instead. How staying had invited connection, responsibility, and the risk that came with both. The radio crackled softly at his hip, alive in a way it hadn't been before. Not demanding, just present. Ethan looked back at the cabin, at the light spilling from its window, and felt a certainty settle into place. This wasn't borrowed ground anymore. It was work. It was trust. It was something that could be lost, but only if he walked away. Rex stirred, lifting his head as if sensing the shift. Ethan knelt and pressed his forehead briefly against the dog's, a quiet promise passing between them. We're here, he said softly. And the place, solid and scarred and standing, seemed to agree. Autumn arrived the way it always did in the mountains, without asking permission. The mornings sharpened, frost whitening the edges of leaves before the sun burned it away. The creek ran lower but faster, clear as glass, its sound steady enough to lull thought. Ethan Cole learned to measure time not by dates, but by tasks completed and fires tended, by how Rex rose a little slower each dawn and settled a little closer each night. The cabin changed in small, deliberate ways. Ben Kessler delivered the lumber he'd promised, rough cut and heavy with resin, stacked neatly along the south wall. Ethan used it to brace the bowed section properly, fitting each beam with patient care. The roof patch became a roof repair, layered and sealed. Donna Mercer stopped by twice more with updated radio channels and a weather report that mattered. Maya Alvarez brought prints of the photographs she'd taken, Quiet images of the cabin against morning light, of Rex in profile at the doorway, eyes half closed, listening to the world. None of it felt rushed. That was the difference now. Staying had slowed time without stopping it. The first snow came early one afternoon, light and tentative, flakes drifting down like a question. Ethan watched from the porch, coffee cooling in his hands. Rex stepped out beside him, sniffed the air, and sneezed once, offended. Ethan laughed softly, the sound surprising him with its ease. By then, the radio crackled more often. Not emergencies, not always. Sometimes it was Jonah asking about trail conditions. Sometimes it was Paul reporting a fallen tree cleared by hikers before it became a problem. Once, it was Luke Garner's voice, thinner but steady, checking in from a hospital room hours away. "I'm starting physical therapy," Luke said. "They say it's going to hurt." He paused. "Worth it." Ethan closed his eyes and smiled, Rex's tail thumping once at the sound. On a cold evening not long after the first snow, Thomas "Tom" Hale returned, his old bay horse picking its way into the clearing with careful steps. The horse looked thinner now, winter sharpening its lines, but its eyes were bright and calm. Tom dismounted slowly, joints stiff, and stood for a moment just looking at the cabin. He wore the same oilskin coat, patched and familiar, his beard trimmed shorter than before. "You made it through," Tom said. "We're still standing," Ethan replied. Tom nodded, satisfied. He tied the horse and stepped closer, resting a hand on the repaired wall. "Sam would have liked this," he said quietly. "Not the polish, the purpose." He glanced at Rex. Dog still got it. Rex lifted his head, ears flicking, and regarded Tom with polite indifference. Tom chuckled. They shared a meal that night, beans and bread, simple and filling. Tom talked about the winter ahead, about the way storms slid down the ridge and piled deep in the low places. Ethan listened, absorbing what mattered. When Tom left, he pressed something small into Ethan's hand, the tarnished compass from Samuel Reed's bundle, its glass cleaned, needle steady. "Belongs here," Tom said. "With you." Ethan closed his fingers around it, weight and meaning aligning. "Thank you." Winter settled in earnest after that. The cabin held. Snow piled against the walls and melted into the drainage Ethan had dug, flowing where it was meant to. The stove burned steady. Rex slept more, dreamed more, legs twitching in small distant pursuits. Ethan adjusted, pacing the days to match the dog's needs, working when the light allowed, resting when it didn't. The call that came in mid-January was different, not urgent, not loud. Donna's voice carried calm certainty. "We've got a training exercise scheduled," she said. "Winter navigation, hypothermia response. We'd like to use the cabin as base." She paused. "If that's all right." Ethan looked around the space, at the table worn smooth by use, at the hooks Ben had helped install for gear, at the notebook where he'd begun adding his own entries beneath Samuel Reed's. He pictured boots by the stove, laughter low and careful, the purpose returning in a new shape. "It's all right," he said. They came the next day, 6 volunteers, bundled and focused. Among them was a young woman named Tessa Morgan, compact and strong, with freckles scattered across her cheeks and a braid tucked beneath her cap. She moved with quiet confidence, her humor dry, her questions precise. She watched Rex with open admiration, learned quickly where not to step, when to listen. The exercise went well. Better than well. The cabin proved what it had always been, a place that gathered people and sent them back out steadier than they'd arrived. When it ended, Dana lingered by the door. "There's talk," she said carefully, "about formalizing this. Caretaker status, limited authority, some support." She met Ethan's eyes. "It wouldn't change what you're already doing. It would just make it harder to take away." Ethan thought of the months behind him, the hunger that had sharpened everything, the fear that had hollowed him out, the way Rex had leaned into his leg on the first night and said, without words, "Stay." He thought of Luke walking again, of Ben's lumber stacked against the wall, of Maya's photographs finding their quiet way into local hands. "Let's talk about it," he said. The decision settled in late February, the day the snow softened enough to carry sound again. Paperwork arrived, not thick, not ornate, simple, clear. Ethan signed with steady hands. Dana shook his hand, firm and final. Ben brought a thermos of coffee and stood awkwardly to one side until Ethan invited him in. Maya took no pictures that day. She said some things didn't need to be recorded to be real. Spring came reluctantly, then all at once. The creek swelled. Birds returned, bold and noisy. Ethan added a small sign by the trailhead, carved by hand from cedar. Emergency waypoint, radio on channel 3. Beneath it, smaller letters, safe place. Rex grew slower, his muzzle whitening further, his steps careful but determined. He still checked the perimeter, though Ethan sometimes followed behind, ready to steady him. On warm afternoons, Rex lay in the doorway, eyes closed, soaking up sun. People learned to step around him without being asked. One evening, as the light lingered longer than it had in months, Ethan sat on the porch with Samuel Reed's journal open to a blank page. He wrote carefully, the words plain and true. Stayed through the winter, place held, people came, we did good work. He closed the book and rested his hand on Rex's head. The dog sighed, content, and leaned into the touch. The cabin creaked softly as the temperature dropped, familiar and steady. Ethan looked out over the clearing, the trail, the forest beyond. He no longer felt like he was guarding a line between past and future. He was living in the present, with both feet planted and work that mattered waiting when he stood. When night came, it came gently. The light in the cabin glowed. The radio rested silent but ready. The compass on the shelf pointed true. Ethan breathed in the cool air and let it out slowly. A habit turned into peace. He had come here with nothing but a dog and the will to keep moving. He stayed because the place asked him to, and because he learned how to answer. Home did not announce itself with certainty. It arrived quietly, and then it stayed. Sometimes God doesn't answer our prayers with thunder or miracles we can point to. Sometimes His miracles arrive quietly, as a place that still stands when everything else has fallen, as a loyal dog who refuses to leave, as strength that appears only after we think we have none left. This story isn't just about a veteran, a cabin, or a second chance. It's about the moments when life breaks us open, and God fills the cracks with purpose instead of answers. If you're watching this and carrying something heavy, fear, loss, loneliness, or doubt, know this: you are not forgotten. You're not late, and you're not walking alone, even when the road feels silent. Maybe today's miracle isn't that everything changes. Maybe it's that you stayed. Maybe it's that you kept going. Maybe it's that you chose kindness when no one was watching. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope tonight. Leave a comment and tell us what you're carrying. We read them and we pray over them. Subscribe to the channel so we can keep telling stories that remind us light still finds its way into the darkest places. And wherever you are in the world, may God watch over you, protect you, and guide your steps. May He bless your home, your loved ones, and every quiet battle you are fighting right now. Amen.